In order to fully comprehend the simplicity of music theory, you will definitely want to have a complete understanding of intervals, and the goal of this video is to give you exactly that. An interval is simply the distance between two notes, and there are two different types of intervals. Number one, there's the distance between adjacent notes, and number two, there's the distance to the root note. It's important to understand both types of intervals, and both will be explained in this video. However, you will often find that thinking about intervals as they are related to their root note is usually more practical for live playing, especially if you are a guitar player. In our Western music system, we have exactly 12 notes. The distance or interval between each of the 12 notes is exactly one semitone. This is equivalent to one fret on a guitar or one key on a piano. This equal spacing between each of the 12 notes is known as 12-tone equal temperament tuning. Now, there are many different types of instruments out there, and there are many different musical styles across the world that use more than just 12 notes. However, for the purposes of this video, we will only be focusing on instruments with 12 notes, such as a guitar or a piano. When looking at a guitar or a piano, it may not be completely obvious that there are only 12 notes, and this is due to the various different visual aids of the instrument. For example, on a piano you have some keys that are white and some that are black. This may lead someone to think that black keys and white keys are somehow different from one another. For instance, maybe different rules apply to the white keys that don't apply to the black keys or something like that, but that is absolutely not true. All of the piano keys are simply just 12 equally spaced notes spanning across multiple octaves. If you now look at a guitar fretboard, you will usually see dots on the 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, 12th, and so on frets. Again, this may lead you to believe that there is something special about the dotted frets, when in reality there is absolutely nothing special about these frets at all. Those visual aids simply serve to help you know where you're at while you're playing, kind of like street signs in a neighborhood full of similar looking streets. Therefore, in order to best understand intervals, it helps to remove any and all of these visual aids and instead just look at the 12-note musical alphabet. However, even when you look at it like this, there are still some visual indicators that may lead you to think that some of these notes may somehow be different than others. But again, that is not the case. All 12 notes are created equal, and they are all equally spaced apart by an interval of exactly one semitone. So let's now talk about the sharps and flats stuff that you see here. This is the musical alphabet. This is the stuff that tends to confuse a lot of people and turn them away from ever even attempting to learn music theory. Well, guess what? Having an understanding of intervals will take care of all of that. Instead of thinking in terms of the musical alphabet, you will instead be thinking in terms of numbers. However, in order to successfully make this transition from thinking in terms of notes into thinking in terms of numbers, it will help to at least familiarize yourself with the musical alphabet first. So let's do that now. The musical alphabet consists of 7 letters, A through G. Between A and B you have a note. This note can go by 2 different names, A sharp or B flat. When you see a sharp symbol in front of a note, it means that the note is one semitone higher than the original note. When you see a flat symbol in front of a note, it means that the note is one semitone lower than the original note. So moving on, there's no note between B and C. Why? Well, because that's how the musical alphabet works. Why does Z come after Y in the English alphabet? That's just because that's how the English alphabet works. The musical alphabet is a different alphabet than the one that you are probably taught as your native language. If you're new to music, this may be new to you, but this is how it works. This is the musical alphabet. So moving on, there is a note between C and D, which could either be called C sharp or D flat. And then there's a note between D and E, but then there's no note between E and F. There is a note between F and G. And keep in mind, this is just one big continuous loop as well. Looking at these 12 notes spanned across 2 octaves, you can see that there's also a note between G and A, which is G sharp or A flat. Now listen, I understand that the musical alphabet can be a bit weird, especially if you are a beginner to music theory, and that is precisely why having an understanding of intervals makes all of this music theory stuff so much easier. So let's look at the piano again. You see how each of the 12 notes is exactly one piano key higher or lower than the next, and it keeps repeating in both directions until you run out of keys? The black keys on the piano are those in-between notes that have the 2 different names. All 12 notes are essentially equal starting points. They are all separated by exactly the distance of one semitone. So let's now look at the guitar fretboard again. Again, you can see how every single note is exactly 1 fret apart. and the musical alphabet just keeps looping over and over again, no matter where your starting point is. You could visualize the fretboard using sharp names for the in-between notes, or flat names for the in-between notes. You could even think of each individual string on a guitar as a 2-octave section of a piano. Pick a note, any note. Now move up or down the string and you will see that it is simply one continuous loop of the musical alphabet, which only ends once you run out of frets. So let's now go back to looking at the 12 notes next to each other again. This way we aren't thrown off by any of those visual aids provided by our instrument of choice. In fact, let's try to visually simplify this even more. What you now see here are 12 equally sized and equally spaced squares. The in-between notes have a diagonal line going through them to indicate that they are the ones that have 2 different names. And since this musical alphabet is a never-ending continuous loop, let's visualize these 12 notes spanned across 2 octaves instead of just 1. You'll see how this comes in handy as we move through this video. If you recall, there are 2 different types of intervals. Number 1, you have the distance between adjacent notes, and number 2, you have the distance to the root note. This chart here refers to the second type. Basically, you can choose any one of the 12 notes in any octave and assign it the number 1. Every other note in relation to the 1 has a specific interval. So let's bust out the old piano and choose a random starting note. I'll choose the note D. So let's play around with some of these intervals and see how they sound. Alright, here's the note D right here. The second note. So that's a major second. So you can think happy birthday. So major second, and then the next note is going to be a major third above the root. So root major third. You can think of Kumbaya. So that's the major third. The next note is a perfect fourth above the root, which is 5 semitones. So you can think of Here Comes the Bride. So this part of it. That's what a perfect fourth sounds like. So then the next note is a perfect fifth above the root, which is 7 semitones. So that sounds like this. So you can kind of think of that. That's the Star Wars theme song. That's what a perfect fifth sounds like. The next note is a major sixth above the root, which is 9 semitones. So that sounds like this. So if you know the Christmas jingle dashing through the snow part. So this. That's what a major sixth sounds like. The 7th note of a major scale is a major 7th interval, which sounds like this. That's 11 semitones. And you can think of the song Take On Me. So hold your ears because I'm about to sing here. So take on me. Horrible, I know. But so that's the sound of a major 7th interval. And then you have the octave. And with time, you'll start to hear when notes are the same note, but an octave apart. So here's a D, here's D, here's D, here's D. So the benefit of doing this is that now you can start to think about these notes as numbers instead of actual notes. So instead of thinking D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D, you can think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. So that's going to be the same for any other starting note. Let's say that I wanted to start on the note, I don't know, E for example. So here's E. The intervals within that scale are all still the same if I want to play Happy Birthday. Or if I want to play Kumbaya with the third. Or if I want to play Here Comes the Bride with the fourth. Or if I want to play Star Wars with the fifth. Or if I want to play the Dashing Through the Snow part of Jingle Bells with the major sixth. Or if I want to play Take On Me. Or if I want to play the octave. So that was a completely different key right there. That was the key of E major. That was the E major scale. But as you can hear, all of the intervals are exactly the same. So now I'm thinking about the notes as numbers and how these numbers relate to each other, regardless of the key that I'm playing in. Since there are 12 notes, there are 12 potential keys. A key consists of 7 unique notes, which are determined by choosing any one of the 12 potential starting notes and then playing the major scale. The major scale is a combination of 7 specific intervals. Remember, there are 2 different types of intervals. There's the distance between adjacent notes, and there's the distance to the root. So here's the major scale formula written out using both types of intervals. Let's just look at the first one for now so you can see how all 12 major scales are related to one another. Pick a note, any note. That's your root note. Let's start on the note, I don't know, F. Apply the first major scale formula, and you get the notes of the F major scale. So let's pick another note. So we'll pick E flat this time. Again, apply the major scale formula, and here are your notes for the key of E flat major. So let's try one more. Let's start on the note C. So here are the notes for the key of C major. C major happens to be the one key that only contains natural notes. As you can see, there are none of those in-between notes that have the 2 different names in the key of C major. On a piano, the key of C major is just the white keys. For this reason, music theory concepts are usually taught in the key of C major. The key of C major makes everything in Western music theory so much easier to visualize when compared to other keys. However, there is absolutely nothing inherently special about the key of C major. C major is very pretty looking on a piano, sure. However, on a guitar, G major is arguably a better starting key. All 12 keys are mathematically equal, at least from an interval standpoint, so it does not matter which key you're playing in. The rules of music theory apply exactly the same to all 12 keys. Pick a starting note, play the major scale by applying the interval formula. Boom, there's the notes of your key. So let's now look at the second interval type and how it applies to major scales. This is where we compare each note in the scale to the root note. And again, this is done through the use of scale formulas. The major scale has a very easy scale formula to remember, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So pick a starting note, any one. We'll choose the note F again since we've already looked at that one. That's going to be our 1. So there's your F major scale. Try it starting on any one of the 12 possible starting notes. The intervallic relationship is always going to be the same regardless of the root note. This applies not only to major scales but to all scales. There are countless scales, each of which has its own unique scale formula. The major scale is the default scale used in Western music theory, which is used to determine the notes for each of the 12 keys. However, aside from the fact that the major scale has been deemed the chosen one, there's really nothing special about it. The major scale is nothing other than simply choosing one of the 12 starting notes and then applying a scale formula. Due to the fact that it has been chosen as the one, it is the scale that gets the nice, pretty, and easy to remember scale formula of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's look at a few other common scales. First, we'll start off with the natural minor scale, which has 2 scale formulas. The first one is just the distance between adjacent notes, which consists of whole steps and half steps, and then the second one is the distance between each note and the root of the scale. So let's look at an example. Let's say that we wanted to determine the notes of the F natural minor scale. First, we would start on the note F and apply either of these 2 scale formulas. Starting on the note F and applying the sequence of whole and half steps, we are left with the notes of the F natural minor scale. Alternatively, starting with the F major scale, which we have already determined in a previous example to be F, G, A, B flat, C, D, and E, and then flattening the 3rd, 6th, and 7th note as dictated by the scale formula, this also yields the F natural minor scale. This intervallic relationship will remain the same for all 12 potential starting notes, which yields 12 natural minor scales. Another fun scale is the harmonic minor scale, which has the following scale formulas. In the first formula, the whole half indicates a whole step plus a half step, or 3 semitones. So it's a big jump between the 6th and 7th notes of this scale, and that is actually what gives the harmonic minor scale its signature sound. Another thing to note is that the harmonic minor scale formula is very similar to the natural minor scale formula, with the only difference being that the harmonic minor scale has a major 7th interval in it, whereas the natural minor scale has a minor 7th interval in it. Now, I understand that this terminology can sometimes get a bit confusing. Major this, flattened that, natural this, minor that. However, ignoring the semantics and just looking at the numbers, things start to become more clear. For example, if you're already comfortable playing and improvising with the natural minor scale, but you are unfamiliar with using the harmonic minor scale, you could simply train yourself to always be aware of which note is the flat 7, regardless of which key you are playing in. By having this awareness, you can then easily switch back and forth between the natural minor and the harmonic minor, and you can do this for any of the 12 keys. All it took was one simple shift in your awareness and just thinking, hey, this is note 7. I make this little manipulation, boom, now I can play an entirely new scale. You can tell if a scale is a major type of scale or a minor type of scale simply by looking at the third. Major scales contain a major third, minor scales contain a minor third. Here are some examples of major types of scales. And here are some examples of minor types of scales. Notice that all of the major scales have a major third and all of the minor scales have a minor third. The quote-unquote major scale, also known as the Ionian scale, is the default scale for which to apply scale formulas. In other words, when it comes to applying these scale formulas, you start with the major scale, which has the formula 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then you sharpen or flatten any notes that the scale formula dictates. That is the math behind the music theory. However, when jamming in minor types of tonalities, which typically use minor types of scales, the common default scale for most musicians is going to be the natural minor scale, otherwise known as the Aeolian scale. Then you have those pesky guitar players with their weird ways of doing things. The typical default scale for those nerds tends to be the minor pentatonic scale, which is just a reduced version of the natural minor scale, as it contains 5 of the 7 total notes. This is actually the point at which all of this interval stuff really starts to help for guitar players. As a guitar player, you're probably already familiar with the minor pentatonic scale in position 1. Many guitar players start out simply by memorizing this shape with no attention paid to the actual notes. The reason for this is because this shape is movable from key to key to key. Play the shape here starting on the 5th fret and it's the A minor pentatonic scale. Play the shape here starting on the 7th fret and it's the B minor pentatonic scale. Play the shape here starting on the 9th fret and it becomes the C sharp minor pentatonic scale. The reason that the shape is movable from key to key to key is because the intervals. The actual notes change between the A minor pentatonic versus the B minor pentatonic versus the C sharp minor pentatonic. However, the intervals always remain the same. As a guitar player, try to always think about this pattern in terms of its intervals, assuming you're not doing that already. By doing this, you can easily mix a bunch of different minor types of scales around. So let's say that you want to throw some Dorian flavor into your minor pentatonic playing. just chuck a natural 6 in there. What's that, you say? You want to add some harmonic minor flavor in there? Just raise the 7th. How about some of that nice bluesy major minor hybrid stuff? No problem, just throw a major third into your minor pentatonic licks and voila! Intervals are pretty cool. One thing that tends to confuse people is scale intervals versus chord intervals. All of it comes from the major scale, as that is the starting point for all Western music theory. When a song remains in one single key, which is very common, especially in mainstream music, the scale remains constant while the chords are constantly changing. Again, the scale remains constant while the chords are constantly changing. A song that is in the key of C major may have a 4-chord progression that goes something like C major, G major, D minor, A minor. All 4 of these chords can be found in the key of C major. So the C major scale is the scale to use, which remains constant the entire time. The notes of this scale are C, D, E, F, G, A, B. You can turn that into numbers and just say that each of those notes is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Whichever way you want to think about it, it's the same thing. These are the notes that the singer will use to sing pretty melody lines with. These are the notes that the lead guitar player will use to serenade you with sweet solos. This is the scale. This is layer 1. Layer 1 remains constant. You then have the actual chords to pay attention to. These are constantly changing throughout the entire song. This is what I refer to as layer 2. So what exactly makes each of these chords major or minor? Well, the answer to that is, you guessed it, intervals. Your major chord formula is 1, 3, 5. Your minor chord formula is 1, flat 3, 5. So the C major chord is derived by taking the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note of the C major scale. The G major chord is derived by taking the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note of the G major scale. The D minor chord is derived by taking the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note of the D major scale and then flattening the 3rd. The A minor chord is derived by taking the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note of the A major scale and then flattening the 3rd. You could also arrive at these same major chords simply by starting on the note C and then playing a major 3rd and perfect 5th in addition to the root, or doing the same thing by starting on the note G, and you can get your major chords that way. Or you can get your minor chords by starting on the note A and then playing a minor 3rd and a perfect 5th in addition to the root, or doing the same thing starting with the note D, and then there's your minor chords. So there's always a few different ways to skin the cat, but don't skin cats, that's not nice. Instead, just learn intervals. If you ever want to play any chord, simply just start with the major scale and apply the chord formula. Again, if you're a guitar player, I'm telling you, you've got it so easy. All you need to do is learn a single shape for any single chord, and then you can move it all up and down the fretboard. For example, let's say that you play this D major chord. So forget the open D string for now, just play the high 3 strings. So keep in mind that the root of this chord is always going to be found on the B string, which in this case is the note D, which is what makes it a D major chord. So this shape can now be moved anywhere up and down the fretboard, and the intervals are the reason that it always maintains the same shape. So if you don't already know the notes of the B string by heart, you can always refer to the ever-looping 12-note musical alphabet, which is always present everywhere. So you can just move the shape up by 1 fret and it becomes a D sharp major chord, which could also be referred to as an E flat major chord. Move it up again, it becomes an E major chord. Move it up again 1 fret, it becomes an F major chord, and so on. So the notes change as the chords do, but the 1, 3, and 5 always remains constant. So knowing this information means that you can easily manipulate any of these major chords into minor chords, or any other type of chord for that matter. For example, knowing that the 3 is always going to be found on the high E string in the shape, you can then lower that note by 1 fret, which will turn it into a minor chord. So you can turn this D major chord into a D minor chord. You can turn this D sharp major chord into a D sharp minor chord. Let's try some other quick chord manipulations. You can turn this E major chord into an E augmented chord by raising the 5th, because that's what the chord formula for an augmented chord tells you to do. Or you can take this F major chord and turn it into an F diminished triad by lowering the 3rd and the 5th, because that's what the diminished triad chord formula tells you to do. Because of intervals, guitar players really do get to live a life of peace and happiness. Learn a few notes here and there, then just interval your way to greatness. Many a rock star have been born this way. A scale is considered to be a relative mode of another scale if both scales share all of the same notes as one another. The following 7 scales are all relative modes of one another. Each of these scales have a different scale formula and therefore produce a significantly different sound from one another with respect to their root note. Each of these scales also have a different whole and half step sequence, which is the formula that represents the distance between adjacent notes within these scales. But the intervallic structure between the adjacent notes of each of these scales is a strong, unbroken bond. That's what makes them modes. Each of these scales contains 5 whole steps and 2 half steps, and it just keeps going around in one continuous loop regardless of the starting point. For example, if you play the G major scale starting and ending on the 2nd note, you get the A Dorian scale. If you play the G major scale starting and ending on the 3rd note, you get the B Phrygian scale. The G major scale, the A Dorian scale, and the B Phrygian scale are therefore said to be relative modes of one another. Each scale has a different scale formula, and therefore a different sound with respect to its root note. However, the bond between notes remains consistent because these scales are all modes of one another. The natural minor scale, otherwise known as the Aeolian scale, is simply a mode of the major scale. However, the harmonic minor scale is not a mode of the major scale, because the intervallic structure between notes has been altered at some point in the loop. For example, comparing the notes of the C major scale and the A natural minor scale, you have the same set of 7 notes. But when you look at the notes of the C major scale compared with the A harmonic minor scale, you see that you have 2 different sets of notes. Raising that 7th note from that of the natural minor scale results in the whole plus half step interval between the 6th and 7th notes. This therefore breaks the bond between notes, which is why the harmonic minor scale is not a mode of the major scale, but the natural minor scale is. Make sense? Cool. Now here's some more cool stuff for you. The harmonic minor scale has 7 modes of its own. Since we were just talking about the A harmonic minor scale, let's look at the 7 modes of that one. You can see that all 7 of these scales share the same 7 notes as one another. For that reason, these are all considered to be relative modes of each other, and by extension this also means that the bond between notes is present in all 7 scales. Looking at the 7 modes of the harmonic minor scale written in whole half step form, notice that the whole plus half interval is present in all 7 formulas, plus the 3 whole steps and the 3 half steps. This looping quality is what causes certain scales to be relative modes of one another. So this may have been a lot to take in, but if you take absolutely nothing else from this video, be sure to at least take this. With regards to intervals, all 12 notes are mathematically equal. This means that although the key of C major gets talked about a lot in music theory classes, it is in no way special in comparison to any of the other 12 keys. The key of C major is mathematically equivalent to the key of G major, which is mathematically equivalent to the key of B flat major, and so on for all 12 keys. This means that all major chords have the same internal structure, and there are 12 in total. This means that all minor chords have the same internal structure, and there are 12 in total. This means that the E harmonic minor scale is structurally the same as the F harmonic minor scale, which is structurally the same as the F sharp harmonic minor scale, and so on for all 12 possible harmonic minor scales. Intervals are the math behind all of music theory. Intervals allow you to replace notes of the musical alphabet with numbers. Certain instruments, such as guitar, become much easier to navigate when thinking in terms of intervals as opposed to thinking in terms of actual notes. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video and you want to check out some more of my stuff, be sure to stop by and check out my website, zombieguitar.com. That has been my passion, my labor of love for the last almost 8 years or so, since 2015. And just keep adding more lessons on there, keep diving into music theory. It's Music Theory for Guitar Players website, so if that sounds like your thing, stop by, check it out. Thanks again.